Hello everyone! After a long wait, it's finally here. If you're new to Pouakai, make sure you watch parts 1 and 2 to get an idea of what's happening. But if you've watched the first 2 parts, then here's part 3. So here we are, the epic grand finale of Pouakai. Akahata was practicing with his staff. He saw someone running towards the camp and he tensed, relaxing when he saw who it was. "Taika is coming!" cried Hunipo. Everyone stopped what they were doing. "I got away with my life, but they were following me. The pact has been broken." Akahata needed only a glance from his chief to know what was required of him. He assembled his warriors and went to meet them. Akahata may have been 53 years old, but he fought with the strength of 10 men. He'd liked to boast of his wakapapa, an ancestry largely of warriors which had given him the mana to be the strongest warrior in the iwi. His only regret was not having any sons to pass it on, though he had daughters, only one still alive. Akahata's staff was bigger than anybody else's, taller than most men. Anyone else who had tried to hold his staff found they couldn't lift it, let alone wield it. Hunipo had tried once, but even then he'd had to use 2 hands. Akahata could wield it with 1. Spears snapped, teeth were broken, faces were smashed, abdomens burst. Akahata clashed and felled opponents in a matter of seconds. Whether they came at him individually or in groups, it didn't matter. Akahata liked the groups better. Even when a spear tore a gash in his shoulder, all he did was get angry and push through 10 people just to kill the culprit. Akahata had fought in many battles over the years. He was famous for it. He exceeded even Kaihautu in that respect. "Do you need help?" said Hunipo. "Get away from me!" Akahata shoved him aside and felled more opponents. Hunipo summoned some of Taika's men. "Keep him engaged. Use your spears, your long ones, no staffs." The warrior trembled and handed it to him. Hunipo waited for the other warriors to encircle him. By now Akahata had separated himself too far from the others. "Come on then!" He goaded another 20 people to attack him. He parried spears and staffs alike, completely engrossed. "Mana! Mana!" He must have thought no one could defeat him. The spears crowded him. He grabbed them, snapped them, pushed them away. More kept coming. Then one found him in the back. Akahata howled and bludgeoned the offender. Then another one found his left leg. He collapsed to one knee, swung wildly. Another found his stomach. He snapped the spear. 2 found his ribs all at once. "Enough!" Hunipo's voice silenced any further attack. Akahata was on his knees, bleeding profusely. His eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "You're a big problem," said Hunipo. "If I want my father's position, I will have to take it by force, since he doesn't believe in me. I couldn't have his right-hand man with him when that happened." "You traitor! You lying, treacherous!" He scrambled to his feet. Hunipo stepped backwards. Someone thrust another spear and it went through Akahata's right arm. "Coward! I can't take any chances with you. You..." Akahata bent the spear till it snapped. Someone came in with a staff and was quickly disarmed and bludgeoned. "Spears only!" cried Hunipo. Someone tried to strike him. Akahata grabbed him and broke his neck. That angered someone else into trying, perhaps a brother. Akahata dealt with him the same way. "What part of spears only don't you understand?" Everyone else with a staff backed away, sheepish. Akahata breathed long and deep. His anger seemed to be replaced with a strange calm. "He never had a high opinion of you, did he?" Hunipo bit back tears. He nodded at someone. They thrust the spear through his broad chest till it was halfway through. Akahata, incredibly, tried to stand and walked into the spear. His hands groped at him like a blind man's. When Hunipo realized he might reach him, he pushed the spear forward, and Akahata collapsed. Hunipo nodded to the others. 1 stab became 2. 2 became 3, and it multiplied from there. He looked at the others. "I will meet with you again, but first I must bring Akahata back to the Hapu." Maya watched the surviving warriors return. There were casualties. Some were leaning on others and hobbling along. But then she saw a group of people carrying something. You could have said it was instinct, but Maya hurried towards them. "Father!" The group lay him down. If anything, she seemed to scream louder than when her sister died. She rocked her father back and forth, trying vainly to revive him. "What happened?" she cried. "Someone tell me!" Her brown eyes blazed fiercely. "I think he got carried away," said Hunipo. I tried to call him back, but he wouldn't listen. He was too proud. Maya, I'm so sorry. I did everything I could. Tui was thrown to the ground in front of the hapu. Then some warriors came to tie him to a tree trunk. It wasn't me, he cried. It was Hunupo. He's lying. You see, father? He's trying to turn it back on me. It's what guilty people do. He wants Maya. He wants your position. When I killed the Pouakais, he tried to take them from me and claim it was him. Then I saw him sneaking off to talk to Taika. He was trying to make a deal with him. He wanted your position and wanted them to back him up. He led an attack on us in order to draw Akahata out so he could be killed. Maya, he's got your father's blood on his hands. What do you say? Maya walked towards Tui. Her lovely face was red with grief. There was no mercy. Tui had often enjoyed the grace of how she moved. She looked so strong, so able. Now it terrified him. Maya, I didn't... She slapped him in the face. She slapped him again, harder. She rained her fists on him. No one tried to stop her. Tui cried. She sank her teeth into his cheek. If it were anyone else, Tui would have defended himself. He might have spat or bitten at them, perhaps given them a headbutt. But he did nothing. When she came close to taking out his eye, he keeled forward and whimpered. Then finally she stopped, but more because she was tired than remorseful. Maya! She kicked him in the face and he fell back against the trunk. Tui's head reeled. It was a miracle she hadn't knocked him out. The other warriors threw sticks and stones. Hunu watched, horrified. Despite pressure from the others, he couldn't join in. He stood there, helpless. He felt a sigh of relief when Kaihautu told them to stop. This boy has committed the most terrible crimes. He has stolen my belongings. He has claimed fraud. He has conspired with our enemies to overthrow me. All that is tapu. Hunupo, my son, you have gained much utu from exposing him. I regret not seeing the good in you before. I shall now pass to you the position of chief. Hunupo grinned. Maya grinned. The hapu nodded its approval. Hunu's heart sank. This is all wrong. As for this boy, there is only one sentence I can pass. One of the warriors handed him a knife. Put him into position. 2 warriors came and forced Tui's head backwards. Do you have any last words? Tui stared pleadingly at Hunu. Do you have any last words? Kaihautu repeated impatiently. Tui didn't say anything. Very well then. The knife was too close. Chief! He wavered. What is it, Hunu? Can I speak to you in private for a moment? Now, yes. Kaihautu looked at Tui, then back at Hunu. Make it quick. The 2 of them went back towards the camp. Tui breathed a sigh of relief. Maya watched with confusion. Hunupo's heart hammered. A moment really is just a figure of speech, Tui realised. They were gone for some time. Then he saw Kaihautu and Hunu walking back together. Kaihautu's face had changed, the look of someone with a hidden knowledge, looking for the right moment to share it. Kaihautu looked towards Hunupo and his friends. If any of you would like to recant your story, please do so now. Maya shot a look toward the boys, confused, bewildered. If you come forward now, your punishment will be less. Fail to do that, and it's death. The first of Hunupo's friends hurried forward. The others followed. Rawiri hesitated and muttered an apology to Hunupo. It's over, said Kaihautu. You have now lost all your utu. Maya stared. Do you want to tell them what really happened, or shall I? Said Kaihautu. Hunupo ground his teeth. His breathing quickened. If you don't tell me in 5 seconds, I will. You might get some utu back if you tell us yourself. 5 seconds passed too quickly. His father allowed him another 5. Hunupo didn't say a word. My son framed this boy. All that he's accused him of doing, he's guilty of himself. This boy killed the Pouakais. He has nothing to do with Akahata's death. He may have taken my things, but he had nothing to do with trying to overthrow me. Tui found himself looking at Maya. She was now staring at him open-mouthed. Her eyes sparkled with what Tui fancied to be horror. She switched her gaze toward Hunupo, and it changed to something else. She ran at him, clawed. They struggled, and Hunupo threw her against the tree so hard she went limp. Maya! Tui's bonds held him back. Hunupo turned back towards the group and uttered a loud, deafening cry, like that of a haka but shorter. It was answered by more cries. The bushes exploded and warriors came charging, fast and sudden. Everything turned to a chaos of screams and clashes. "Hunu!" Tui's cry got lost. "Hunu! Cut me loose now!" Hunu didn't seem to hear him. He stood in the middle of the melee as if he were a spectator, around warriors being felled from both sides. He looked frozen. "Come here now!" Tui's waves were desperate, and when Hunu saw him he came running with a knife in hand. "Thank you," he muttered. "Don't thank me yet. Where's Maya?" Hunu looked over his shoulder at her body lying still. Tui was quickly by her side. "Maya, wake up!" He shook her several times. She didn't respond. "Tui!" When Tui turned, he saw a warrior with a staff in front of him. He swung. The staff struck the tree. Clack! Tui struggled out of the way. The warrior brought down an overhead swing. Tui edged backwards. Then he noticed that the warrior seemed to lose interest in him and went towards Maya. The warrior knelt on top of her. Tui ran and jumped on his back. The warrior tried to shake him off and was successful. The warrior bore down on him. Hunu thrust his knife into his back. It should have been the neck. The warrior elbowed Hunu in the face and went to attack him. Then Tui was on his back again. "Hunu, throw it to me!" Hunu tossed the knife. Tui caught it by the handle and thrust it into the warrior's neck, and he crumpled. Tui took the staff. He offered it to Hunu. Hunu pushed it back at him. "You'd be better with it than me." The battle raged. "We should somehow rejoin the fight," said Hunu. "We should get Maya to a safe place first," said Tui. "I can't lift her alone." The two boys carried her away into the forest. Hunupo felled people he knew, even some of his friends. He had seen his father striking someone down and was about to go for him when he saw two people carrying someone away. Father can wait. He held one of the warriors by the arm and said, "Disable him, but don't kill him until I get back. Ask the others to do the same." The warrior nodded. Hunupo ran from the battle. Tui and Hunu laid Maya upright against a tree fern. "Do you think she'll be okay?" said Hunu. "I hope so," said Tui with more conviction than he felt. "She's knocked out. We'll just have to keep watch over her." He didn't hear the vegetation snap. "Taking care of her, are you?" "No thanks to you." Somehow the voice sounded like Hunupo's, but it wasn't. It was too deep. Taika stood there with two warriors beside him. "Step aside from her and you won't get hurt." Tui shook his head defiantly. "You're outnumbered. There's 3 of us and 2 of you. You're not warriors." Tui had been taught combat skills by his father, but he wasn't the best at it. He'd never had a straight-on duel with anyone. Taika walked up to Tui. Hunu stepped in front of him, but when he saw that Taika's staff wouldn't lower, he gave a gasp of terror and stepped aside. Tui stayed where he was. "Are you really going to die for her? A girl that probably ignored you for most of your life?" "Yes, I will, because now she no longer ignores me. I killed the Pouakais. She chooses me." "Is that so?" Tui blocked the overhead swing and braced. Hunu tried to attack Taika but was knocked to the ground by the other 2 warriors. Tui's strength couldn't hold him forever. There was a smack, and someone burst from the vegetation and smashed the face of one of the warriors. The other one was promptly taken out. It happened so fast that Taika barely registered the newcomer, until his own head was smashed open. Hunupo stood above him, grinning. Taika could barely talk. "You said I lied. There was no way I was sharing anything with the likes of you. Maya and your territory will be mine now." "You treacherous!" Another stroke burst Taika's brains. "Surprised, are you?" said Hunupo. "He was a means to an end. I'll take his territory now and we can have more moas to go around, and seals, whales, dolphins and penguins. The best part is I don't have to share anything, especially Maya." "You're not going anywhere near her," said Tui. "She's mine by right. You have no right to anything now." "I have a right to everything. Are you going to step aside and let me do my thing, or are you going to die too?" "I'd rather do that than let you rape Maya." "Okay then." Hunupo lunged and Tui blocked. Hunu sank his teeth into his thigh. The pain gave Tui the upper hand and his staff swung down onto his shoulder. The blow took Hunupo by surprise. He never thought much of Tui in anything, let alone as a fighter. Hunupo kicked Hunu away and really swung at Tui. His blows smacked into branches and tree trunks. Tui led Hunupo back to the camp, and Tui was stunned to see that the fighting had ceased. Kaihautu stood there, surrounded by Taika's warriors. Tui realised it too late. "You're not going anywhere, Tui," said Hunipo. "In fact, you've got an important job to do. I don't understand. You and I are going to settle this the old way." Hunipo readied himself into a stance. Tui hesitated. "If you don't fight me, then everyone here will die." Tui saw the frightened faces of everyone in the hapu. Ayarama looked like she suffered the most. Her age made it harder for her to cope with the stress of being captured. She looked dehydrated and would probably faint if someone didn't give her some water. Even Mother was watching him frantically. Tui readied himself. Hunipo came quickly. They clacked weapons fiercely. At times Tui was pushed into the crowd. He would be pushed back, straight into Hunipo. A staff blow glanced off of Tui's forehead and Hunipo didn't bother hiding his smile. Pain, hunger, thirst, safety. Tui swung sideways. It connected with Hunipo's face and a white shard flew outwards. Tui stared at the hole he'd made. Hunipo's smile looked even more terrible now. Hunipo's blows came harder. Tui couldn't find an opening and the last blow nearly took the staff out of his hands. There were cries of alarm and Hunipo moved in. "Safety!" Tui couldn't lift his staff fast enough. Clack! It didn't sound right for a strike to the face. Hunipo braced against his father. Kaihautu's whalebone staff locked with his son's wooden one. His father grimaced, slackening. Hunipo struck him in the face with the frontal edge. His grey hair and beard were splattered red. Tui saw with pity how frail he was. His muscles had thinned over the years, giving him an emaciated look. He must have been in such pain that even turning to look at Tui was difficult. "You have such mana and utu today." His voice was hoarse, like that of someone taking the last breath. "I forgive you for taking my things. They are all yours now. My time is over. Look after our people for me." The old chief handed Tui his prized weapon. Hunipo looked away as if hurt. When he returned his gaze, he was shedding tears. Hunipo lunged. Kaihautu threw himself at his son, unarmed and feeble. Hunipo brought it crashing down on his father's head. Even in death, with his brain spurting, he exuded peace and control. Tui was right behind him and the blow took Hunipo off guard. He recovered swiftly and went back to being almost invincible. Tui was tiring again. The opening Kaihautu had given him hadn't been sufficient. Tui's strike missed and Hunipo's frontal edge struck his forehead again. Pain. Such searing pain. To his surprise, he saw Maya and Hunu walking towards them, and someone else that he vaguely recognised. The stunned look on his face made Hunipo see the same thing. Then Hunipo saw something else. His smile looked more terrible with his cracked tooth and blood all over it. "Don't think that just because my father chose you means you'll have it." Then Tui saw the same thing. More warriors bearing the clothes and colours of Taika's iwi. They stood there, not appearing to do anything other than watch. You can still lose everything. Tui had a sinking feeling that he was right. He was wobbling on his feet, exhausted. He would likely be unpopular, but Hunipo would be chief after all. With more of Taika's warriors behind him, it was a certainty. Maya would be forced against her will to be his mate. Indeed, the rest of the hapu would be forced to follow him. He also supposed that Hunu and anyone else on his side would be executed. Unless... He was in so much pain. His head throbbed. His fingers were raw and swollen where they'd been struck. He was bleeding profusely. He was starving, dehydrated, and desperately in need to void himself. He was paralysed with fear, feeling as if all safety had gone from the world and that he would die today. It's to be expected. Perhaps he wasn't as strong as he'd thought. He felt a cringe of embarrassment, feeling as though none of the things he'd been through had made his fear and pain any easier to face. That he was only as good as his last exposure. Perhaps twisting his ankle, surviving Pouakai attacks, extreme cold and hunger hadn't made him strong and fearless. There is no such thing as being fearless. "You're going to die today." Hunipo loved to say that. "Yes, I will. In one stroke, I'll show everyone how weak you really are." One stroke. Tui's mind flared. One stroke. That's it. You're right. At least partially. Twisting my ankle, surviving Pouakai attacks, extreme cold and hunger hadn't made me fearless. Sometimes it didn't make me strong. but I learned how to take the pain. He remembered his plan when taking down the Pouakai. The same principle. Tui made a feint. Clack! Tui's strikes were nervous, tentative. Hunupo's gained confidence. Tui backed away, aware that the more times he did it, the worse it would be. Hunupo looked so happy. No doubt he was high on dreams of leadership and success, of propagating mana with Maya. Hunupo gritted his teeth. His staff raised for the neck. The heavy, blunt wood connected with Tui's cheek. White fragments flew. His brains wanted to burst. Expect it! Expect it! The heavy, blunt whalebone also connected with Hunupo's. Looks like Hunupo didn't expect it. Hunupo's howls were a spectacle. He kicked up the grass, contorted this way, that way, every way there was. To Tui's surprise, he felt no pleasure, only a bemused amazement. When Hunupo righted himself, he lolled all over the place. When his howls lost their anger, they gained grief. It sounded worse than any sound Tui had made when Kaihautu had rescued him from the cliff. Tui saw some people laugh and found he couldn't join in. Tui took a few steps towards him. Hunupo shrank away. You wouldn't do it, would you? He was a mussel with no shell. What did you do to a mussel with no shell? There are people here who would say that I should, said Tui. Instinct prickled him into checking the faces around him. Some were angry, some were aggrieved, some seemed to show nothing at all. But as chief, I will not. Thank you. You are so noble. What do I have to do? Run away, Hunupo, and never return. Hunupo looked relieved. Thank you. So much. Tui! His spittle flew into Tui's face. Tui was blinded for a moment. He just had time to avoid a swing, and his staff swung low into Hunupo's very important place, a place Akahata had been struck years before. Hunupo howled. He clutched his crotch and staggered away, holding up a hand, then ran. Hunupo's pain was crippling. He barely kept a decent posture as he ran away. Then he came across Taikaziwi. To his horror, he recognized one person he thought was no longer alive. Not Taika, but one of his warriors. The first one he thought he'd taken care of. A person whose finger travelled towards him. What are you doing? Said Hunupo. The warriors encircled him. He tried to fight them. He killed one, but the spears soon crowded in. One stab became two became three, and it multiplied from there. Afterwards, they walked away. Tui felt as if the world had changed forever. Hunu and nearly all the others seemed to agree. He'd met with Taika's surviving warriors, and the pact had been remade. They would stay away from each other from now on. He then ran to see Hopa and quickly cuddled the kakapo, until he scrabbled to get out. You have done well. Ayarama barely spoke to him, and even when she had, it didn't feel inspiring. Thank you. Tui wondered whether to bow before his healer before realizing he didn't have to. He had a rotten soul, she said, tainted by greed and power. I should tell you the truth. Mahuta's iwi used to be on good terms with us. We had a peaceful relationship, but Hunupo's uncle Ahi wanted to take it for the Hapu, despite there being no need. Ahi was a warrior, and if anything he seemed to miss it more than Akahata. Kaihautu had heard him boast of his plans to take them over, but didn't feel confident to speak up to his father, Irirangi. All the others seemed to share Ahi's desire. At least, they appeared to. There was a battle, and Mahuta's camp was attacked with several killed. That was the battle that lost Akahata his ability to have children. They then came to our camp. We were losing, and they came close to killing all of us. To stop that happening, Kaihautu made a pact with Mahuta to stay out of each other's territories. Ahi was exiled, and rumour has it Mahuta had him tracked down and killed. If that is what happened, he deserved it in my view. He brought chaos upon us. Irirangi, his mother Anahera, and his mate Aroha were also killed in the battle. This all happened when you were a year old, but Hunupo was a small child at the time. I knew he was mischievous and sometimes a bully, but when he started expressing his desire to try to take Mahuta's territory again, his father would have none of it. After all, It's only because of his father's pact that he was alive to have the ambition at all. Perhaps he wanted to avenge his mother. Maybe that was part of it. If it was, he didn't mention that nearly as much as his desire to claim the territory. And just like Ahi, he seemed fascinated by the idea of going to war. With Irarangi dead, the position should have passed to his eldest son Amiri. But Kaihautu stepped up and announced he wanted to become chief. They had a serious argument over the issue and would have likely tried to kill each other if I hadn't stepped in. The death of his parents and Aroha hit him hard. Other people I've known have been crushed by losses like that, but Kaihautu chose to honour their memories by maintaining 15 years of peace. An astonishing story, one Kaihautu had never told him. Tui! At no point in his social history had Maya ever sought Tui for a conversation. It delighted him that today was the day that should change. She hesitated. Your face! She laced her fingers over it. Tui felt a tickle in his stomach. He let her do it before realizing what he should be doing. It's nothing, Maya. Did I damage it? She fussed over him again. She took him in her arms and he didn't stop her. You didn't damage anything. Are you sure? She ran her fingertips on the bite mark she'd left in his cheek. Is it bleeding? If it is, it doesn't matter, said Tui. It'll heal. I'm sorry. I nearly took your eyes out. These eyes are happy just to see you again, Maya. But I shouldn't have done that. That was unforgivable. You believed what Hunupo told you at the time. It's understandable. I used violence against you, she wavered. I tried to kill you. He didn't respond to that. I guess you'll want to move on. What are you talking about? You deserve a mate that hasn't tried to gouge your eyes out. Tui laughed. I wouldn't have expected anything less. She frowned at him. It's not funny. You don't have to put up with that. I understand if you don't want me. I don't think I can imagine that I would ever stop wanting you, said Tui. He took a hold of her waist. I forgive you. Completely. Maya had regained her strength. She still missed her father and her sister, but she never liked to dwell on the past. To cheer herself up, she'd come to watch Tui hunt some moas. He's really good at it. Their spears and their nets had snared 3 moas, which would feed the hapu for several days. Tui had been keen to show the younger boys how to do it. There was no bullying or peer pressure or any kind of toxicity, something Tui had been keen to ensure. Hunu had a great time, and he was nominated to be a sub-team leader. They brought them in at the end of the day and they ate beside the fire under the stars. Tui had turned 18 today, and he'd wanted to show her his skills. It was a day they'd been looking forward to for 2 years. There would always be a 3-year age gap between them. The iwi had a way of frowning upon a woman who was older than her mate, but that didn't seem to matter now that Tui was chief. It had been agreed that Iorama would supervise Tui until he came of age. The night was beautiful. The insects whirred and chirped. Rurus and wekaus hooted. The only light was from the fire, the stars and the moon. The camp had gone to sleep, but Tui and Maya were still awake. They lay next to one another on a bed of moa feathers, the best warmth you could have in the shelter, but Tui still shivered. Maya ran her fingers down his arm. Is something wrong? You aren't saying much. It's just a big moment, you and I together. I hope I'm everything you think I am. Why wouldn't you be? I don't know, it's just aspects of the past are coming back to me. What aspects? He hesitated. Maya studied him hard. You'll have to tell me. What's the problem? I was afraid the whole time, he said. Those nights in the mountains were awful. I thought I was going to die. But you didn't die. The Pouakais, the iwi, Hunupo. Maya frowned. You got past them all. I know, it's just... Her frown intensified. Tui, you're being vague. Just spell it out for me. She stroked his arm. Are you saying you don't feel worthy? Well, maybe. Then tell me exactly why you don't feel worthy. I could choose someone else if you like. What? No, it's just... Listen, I love you very much. For as long as I've known you, you are everything to me and I don't want you to think otherwise. But I think I should go back to the beginning and give you some context as to who I am. If we're going to start a family tonight, then I want to be open and honest about myself. I don't want to hold anything back or else I'll feel like I'm living a lie. Why would you feel like you were living a lie? When I was born, my mother and father had a tough time taking care of me. They said I cried whenever they touched me. They had to give me to Kaihautu to soothe, and he apparently had to use his moa hide to rock me back and forth. I don't know why I needed that. As I grew older, I was told that I preferred being on my own. The others would be playing together and I would sit by myself looking at wetas. It's what my sister used to do. But she must have had a better way of talking to people than me. Every time I tried to talk to people, it's like something wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to join a conversation, I would feel this block. I could understand their words, yet not join in. I still have that at times, and I don't know why. She stroked his arm to get him to continue. It got worse when I turned 11. I wanted to join in with the boys, but I struggled to enjoy things the way they did. I seemed to be the only one that felt frightened. The others didn't seem frightened at all. Then there was you. Many times I wanted to talk to you, but didn't know how, and Hunipo seemed to always be with you. Then there was that day when we went climbing, and I struggled to get down. Kaihautu had to climb the cliff to rescue me. I held onto his back. He told me not to worry. Hunipo and his friends laughed their heads off, and I saw Hunipo go off to talk to you. I saw you laugh, and I felt hurt. Tui, I didn't realise Tani. What? My real name is Tani. She stared at him. Man? But how come we've been calling you Tui? It's because of that incident. Hunipo was the first to call me that. A shortened version of Tui Tama, Tui boy. Then it spread round the camp and soon Mother was using it too. It's what people called me ever since. I was no man. I was a boy. A pathetic, cowardly boy. Not like Makareta, the perfect son she wanted. She wished it was me that had died. You do realise that my brother died trying to imitate what Hunipo liked to do to the moas. He encouraged him. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Oh, Tui, I mean, Tani. I didn't know. So Hunipo is the reason your brother is dead, and he's the reason why I thought your name was Tui? He's also the reason why my father is dead, said Tani. When Hunipo climbed a cliff and couldn't get down, my father tried to rescue him. Hunipo got down on his own. My father fell to his death when a ledge broke beneath his feet. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Seriously? He nodded. Hypocrisy, I suppose. She buried her face in her hands. Tani, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, I wouldn't have called you that. Why didn't you say anything? Back then you barely knew I existed. But what about Kaihautu? He would have done something. I didn't want to give him any more bother, said Tani. I thought he didn't like me. I don't think that was true at all. He was just remote at times. I think he cared about everyone. He was very good to my family. I think he just had a lot to do. It's hard work being a chief. You know that now. You shouldn't have taken it personally. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be as brave and as adventurous, but I felt that my mana was lacking in every area that mattered. I hated the idea of Hunipo going on to be chief just because it was the way. I hated the idea of him having you just because he was born into privilege, with his muscles, his mana, and his chief father, that you would only want the strongest man with the best privilege to be your mate. You would have given him strong, beautiful children, so the cycle would continue, with me having nothing. When the Pouakai killed your sister and you gave your speech, I was excited in a way. I wish your sister were still alive, but she gave me an opportunity to prove myself. I wanted to prove myself to you. I hated feeling behind, so I stole Kaihautu's things just so that I could feel like a chief. What I realised as I was hunting the Pouakais was how backward I felt, but I realised that although Hunipo started it, I perpetuated it. I took fear and pain at face value as reasons not to do things. When I was forced to face that, I found there was an opening on the other side. Afterwards, I would feel stronger. He let that sink in. Would you have chosen me as a mate if the Pouakai hadn't killed Marama? Maya thought for a moment. That's a good question. At that time I would have thought, no. I would have chosen Hunipo because he was older, stronger, better looking. But when you went away and came back with those Pouakais, I had to admit I was surprised. I never imagined for a moment that you would be the one to do that. I honestly expected either Hunipo or one of his friends to do it. It was at that moment that I realised there was more to you than I thought. If you hadn't shown that, then yes, I probably wouldn't have chosen you. But listen, whatever I thought of you back then doesn't matter now. I did have doubts later on. that when you saw me you'd be in for a big disappointment. I meant what I said. I think Hunupo and half the Hapu might have thought I wouldn't. Hunupo especially. I did fancy him, but I liked to take my time. Father didn't understand why I took so long, but I wanted to assess who they were as people. I would only see that when times were dangerous. I trusted Hunupo deeply. I did love him, but I think you being involved showed his true colours. I think he felt threatened by you. I think Kaihautu didn't want him to be chief because he knew he wasn't responsible. I think it's possible that his treatment of you made Kaihautu refuse to pass on the position of chief. Airama told me that Hunupo expressed sentiments of taking over Mahuta's iwi, something his uncle tried to do despite our peaceful relationship. After Ahi attacked them, Mahuta attacked us in retaliation. Hunupo's grandparents and his mother all died in the battle. If Kaihautu hadn't stood up and made a pact to stay away from each other's territories, we would have all been killed, and none of us would be here today. But Hunupo wanted to rip that wound open again. I didn't know that, said Maya, though it makes sense. He wanted his father to admire him for his ambition, and he didn't get it. He was jealous that his father could possibly favour someone not related to him. I didn't realise how dangerous that envy could be until we found out that he and Mahuta's iwi had been in league. He knew full well that Kaihautu would never give it to him, even though he was his son. I never saw it until it was too late. He would have taken the hapu if you hadn't stopped him. He would have raped me if it meant that he could seal his wakapapa with mine. He deceived my father into fighting alone, so he could get a better chance of getting what he wanted. He was no friend. When I realised how badly he deceived me, I realised that I could get things wrong too. If we're to counter all the threats that would face us for all the years to come, I realised I needed someone who was not only strong, beautiful and brave, but honest. But you've demonstrated a quality I hadn't thought of. Resilient. The words sent a shiver down Tani's spine. Tani, I've chosen you because you've shown all those things. It will be part of our wakapapa forever. Everyone descended from us will receive our mana, and our people will stay strong. Her hand moved to his back. Can I consult the gods? She stared. Why? They already approve. They've been with me all this time. I just need to step outside the shelter, nothing more. I'll come back and we'll start a family. She watched him go with dismay. Tani stepped outside the shelter and sat with the glow of the fire in his face and the stars and the moon overhead. Hopa was there, woken from his sleep. He'd been kept outside the shelter for their union's privacy, but now that Tani was outside, he climbed his shoulder to preen his hair. He ran his fingers through his mossy green feathers. His gaze went towards the night landscape. Tain Mahuta, Tuma Twenga, I hope I've done everything you asked. I just want to ask if you think I'm worthy. I need to hear it from you. A ruru hooted from the forest. A wekau answered. The wind blew softly with a chill. He looked up at the moon, bright and full. Then he looked at the ground beneath his feet. Kaihautu used to say that whenever a person died, their Wenua spirit had to be guided to the underworld, where they would make their way to the sea. Kaihautu, Father, Makareta, Akahata, I hope I deserve this. The wind blustered. The cry of rurus loudened. A wekau cried over the top of them. Please tell me, give me your blessing. A kakapo bellowed. Hoapa answered it. A kiwi hissed. The night loudened into a crescendo. Then it died away as quickly as it rose. Of course I am. I made it this way all by myself. You helped me along the way, but it was me. He took Hoapa off his shoulder and ruffled him again. He laid him down. He re-entered the shelter. Maya, I love you. I see now that I am worthy. The gods agree. She pulled him towards her. Her kiss was strong, hot, billowy. Tani's hands travelled to her waist. She broke off. Come. I want you. Maya screamed. Tani held her hand tight. The women willed her not to give up. Keep pushing, said Airama. Be brave. Trust in your mana. Maya howled. Something shifted within her. That's it. One last push. Maya's last scream drowned everything, and at last something gave. Airama caught the infant in her arms, brick red and screaming. "A boy!" Her son was handed to her. "He looks like me," said Tani. "He's got my face." "A handsome face," said Maya. "Can I hold him?" Maya's pass was tentative, reluctant. "Hello, little man." The baby was no longer crying. He looked up at his father with brown eyes, bemused. Tani had not seen many babies. For a long time he thought he would never have any, and even if he did, he thought there would be something different about them, something worse, but his fears were unfounded. He wasn't small, sickly, or misshapen. He had no fangs, no tail, and no wings. He was just right. Hoapa came to inspect him. The baby stared and stretched his hand out towards him. But when he grabbed a hold of his feathers, he didn't like that much, and Tani had to prise his fingers away. He'll learn to be gentle with him one day. As if the excitement had been too much, he nodded off. "Sleep well, my son. We will give you a name in time." He handed him back to his mother. The others had decided to leave them in peace. "A son, just as father would have wanted," said Maya. "I wish he were here. He's dreaming of you all the time. I'm sure of it. Will your mother come and see him?" "I don't know. She still won't admit she was wrong." "I don't care." He was chief. He had a mate, and he'd achieved comparable feats that had exceeded Kaihautu's. He laughed, imagining what Hunahpu would think if he were here now. The son of the chief does not always get everything. It is not always the way. 2 years and 9 months before. Hunahpu and his friends were hyper from the hunt. The moa they'd caught was enormous, enough to feed the hapu for the next 3 days. Maya was there to greet them, and he embraced her. "She's the best. I want her. She's been playing hard to get. I hope something happens so that I can prove myself." He saw something in the sky, enormous and winged. He saw Marama walking away toward the forest, looking for her beetles. "Keep going. We need an emergency. We've lost 3 children to a Pouakai this month. If it takes her, I'll have an opportunity to prove myself. She will be my mate and bear my children, with my mana. Let's keep the others' attention away." Marama looked across to their direction. Hunahpu nodded back, pleased. He animated the conversation. "That's it. If it doesn't happen today, it will happen another day. But I would like it to happen today." Author's note. This story had its tricky moments, but it was such fun to research. New Zealand wildlife and history has fascinated me from an early age. I have not yet been to New Zealand, but my parents lived there for 2 years in the 1980s as GPs, and they travelled there extensively. That is how I came to know about New Zealand's wildlife, long before I became the enthusiast I am today. The lost world of New Zealand keeps me up at night. If I could time travel anywhere at any time in history to go birdwatching, it would be to New Zealand, amongst other places. It was a place that sounded mythical, one that existed within human history, and was comparatively recent in that respect. New Zealand was once part of the supercontinent Gondwanaland, but broke away from around 83 to 79 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. There would have been dinosaurs there at this time. Back then it was known as Zealandia, and from about 23 million years ago became largely submerged, with New Zealand being the largest fragment above sea level. New Caledonia is also another fragment of Zealandia. All in all, Zealandia's entire area was comparable to that of Australia's. When the dinosaurs became extinct about 65 million years ago, the mammal revolution that spread across the other continents did not touch New Zealand, save a few bat species managing to make the journey, as well as marine mammals. This led to a very unusual assemblage of animals. With a lack of land mammals, these same niches were occupied by birds. New Zealand was one of the last land masses to be colonised by humans. The native people are called the Maori, whose ancestors are thought to have come from as far away as Southeast Asia 2,500 years ago, but they spread towards Australia and Polynesia. The Polynesians were famous for their ocean-going explorations. Some headed east towards more islands in the Pacific, such as Easter Island and Hawaii. It's even been suggested that they made it as far east as South America. The evidence for this are locally cultivated potatoes, which are the same kind that the Polynesians grew in the Pacific. Crucially, others would go south. Historians have trouble agreeing on the exact time that the Maori arrived in New Zealand, but it's generally agreed that it happened between the 1280s and 1350s. In all likelihood, it would have been a succession of migrations, as someone presumably had to return to where they came from to let the others know of the way ahead. Return journeys to Polynesia are thought to have been limited because of the difficulty of going against the ocean currents, so those that arrived were generally there to stay. The world that the Maori would have seen when they first arrived would have seemed like the Garden of Eden. There was lush forest, beaches, mountains, the first time they'd ever seen snow, and these were populated by some very strange creatures. As well as the enormous populations of seabirds, fish, seals and whales and dolphins they would have found, on the land the moas were the crucial discovery. The moas were a shock to the arriving Polynesians. Until then they'd never seen any bird larger than a chicken. The South Island giant moas could grow 3 meters tall, about the same height as an elephant. It was said they were frightened of them initially because of their size, but crucially the moas were not frightened of them. Why would they? They had never seen humans or indeed any other land mammal. This was the beginning of the end for the moas. In New Zealand as a whole there were around 11 species of moa. The South Island giant moas were the biggest and had the most meat on them. A big factor in the hunting of birds and marine mammals in New Zealand was that although the Polynesians could cultivate crops, only 7 out of about 20 kinds of crop they brought with them could be cultivated in the colder climate of New Zealand. Even then, not always reliably. That was especially true of their potatoes, so meat became their primary source of food. These moas had no fear of humans and their tame nature made them easy to hunt. A group of about 100 people would have eaten between 40 to 60 moas a week. Their legs made particularly large drumsticks. Other birds were targeted too. If you cast your mind back to the beginning of the story, you may remember Marama came across a strange bird the size of a chicken with a down-curved bill. I had an interesting challenge with this one, because the Maori name for this bird has long been forgotten. It became extinct shortly after the Maori arrived and may have been naturally rare to begin with. The modern name for this bird is the adzebill. This bird was a ground-dwelling rail which was a top predator of the forest floor, eating everything from beetles to tuataras. Tuataras, by the way, are large ancient lizards from the family Rhynchocephalia, meaning beaked heads. Most of these were subdivided and classified as belonging to the family Sphenodontidae, wedge teeth. These originated in the Triassic period 250 million years ago, and died out about 60 million years ago. The tuatara is the only surviving member of this family left on Earth. The name tuatara means in the Maori language peaks on the back, though in terms of their folklore they view them with suspicion. They are believed to be messengers of Whiro, the Maori god of the underworld, and are thought to herald disaster, hence the inspiration for the scene I had. The adzebill was a predator to this lizard and was indeed the top predator on the land until a remarkable newcomer was blown in from Australia. This newcomer was most likely the Australian little eagle or some ancestor that would have competed with the adzebill for hundreds of thousands of years. Between 1.8 million to 700,000 years ago, this eagle diverged from its ancestor and evolved into massive proportions. A bird with a wingspan of between 2.5 to 3 meters long and could stand between 90 to 140 centimeters tall. If the moas occupied the same niche as a giraffe or some other large grazing animals, then this eagle took on the same niche as a lion or a tiger. These birds were large enough to hunt the elephant-sized moas and indeed almost anything else on the forest floor, including its former rival, the adzebill. The Maori called them Pouakais, meaning old glutton. When Europeans came to New Zealand centuries later, they tried to tell us about these birds, but we didn't believe them. At the time we thought it was just a legend, too outlandish to believe. But around 1871, Julian von Haast described the bird from remains gathered by the Canterbury Museum taxidermist Frederick Richardson Fuller from an area that used to be marshland. He called it the Haast's eagle. Its Latin name is Harpagornis muri, the genus name deriving from the Greek word harpax, or grappling hook, and muri, denoting George Henry Moore, the owner of the Glenmark estate on which the remains were found. Julian von Haast broke scientific protocol by describing the eagle himself. He didn't want the remains sent back to Europe because specimens had a way of going missing in transit. One such specimen that went missing was a large extinct species of moth, of which no more remains had been found. The discovery was too important to lose because it confirmed what the Maori had tried to tell us all along, that the Pouakais existed, the largest eagle species to have ever lived. It was a feared predator. Its danger to humans was never actually verified, but I took some liberties with that just so that I could have an exciting story. Maoris would have killed them if given the chance, given the danger that a bird that size could pose to people, especially small children and babies. It was also believed to be a naturally rare bird. It was only found on the South Island, and was estimated to have around 4,000 pairs at most. Some estimates were as low as 1,000 pairs. These became extinct around the early 1400s, when large areas of forest had been cleared and its main diet of moas had also become scarcer. It was doomed to extinction. Moas would survive up until the 1500s, but when they became extinct, the Maori eventually realised the error of their ways. The concepts of mana, tapu and utu have existed for as long as there's been a Maori culture. With respect to tapu, this concept was then used to conserve the natural resources and use them sustainably. It is also where we get the English word taboo. They would also invest a lot more heavily in their agriculture. At least 50 species of bird became extinct in New Zealand after the Maori colonisation, and a further 15 would disappear after 1850. Some of these included the wekau, or as we call it in modern times, the laughing owl, which went extinct by 1914, with unconfirmed reports up until the 1960s. There are still several others surviving, like the South Island saddleback, or the tieke, which Hunupo looked to for signs of approval. It's a bad omen if they sing from the left of you, and a good one if they sing on your right. There's the Matuku Hurupo, known to Europeans as the Australasian bittern, that Tui flushes when he goes to the lake but doesn't catch. The ducks he does manage to catch at the lake are called papangos, now known to Europeans as the New Zealand scaup. The tutuai that Tui sees just before being betrayed by Hunupo is also known as the New Zealand robin, a bird quite unafraid of humans. Some of these living species were feared extinct, like the takehe, which is a large blue rail with a red bill. These were rediscovered in 1948 in Fiordland, the South Island. Then there's the kakapo. Kakapos were feared to have become extinct until a population was found on Stewart Island in 1977, and despite an intensive cat control program, it was decided to move the surviving birds to a handful of predator-free islands like Codfish Island. The entire population is monitored, and strict controls are in place to prevent cats, rats and stoats from getting to their predator-free islands. Because there is a potent risk in introducing things accidentally, Codfish Island is closed to the public. They no longer have any natural predators now that the Haast's eagle and laughing owl are extinct, but to this day when threatened they will freeze motionless, as Hoapa did. Hoapa is inspired by a real-life kakapo superstar, who even has his own Facebook page. His name is Sirocco. Having imprinted on humans, he was deemed unsuitable to be released back into the wild, but he's become an ambassador for his species when he sometimes gets taken from his Codfish Island home and shown to the public. Maori hunted them and sometimes kept them as pets, as did Europeans. Speaking of Europeans, the first ones to arrive were led by the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman in 1642. It was not a pleasant visit. When the Maori saw him, they set out on canoes and did their haka war dance. Hakas like this offer their opponents a choice, to accept their challenge and fight, or to submit and come in peace. All Maori tribes knew this rule. It was the rule that Hunupo used so cleverly to his advantage. But Tasman, having never come across this before, would have been completely unaware that this was a choice. The display likely frightened him, and he fired a cannon shot over their heads to scare them off. Unfortunately, the Maori interpreted this as an acceptance of their challenge. Tasman's ship was attacked, with 4 sailors killed and the death of at least 1 Maori. Tasman would make a speedy getaway and never return. But the name New Zealand stuck, although Tasman initially called it Statenland, believing that it was an island of the same name off the coast of Argentina. When it was realised that it was nowhere near Argentina, Dutch cartographers renamed it Nova Zeelandië, New Zealand's Latin name, and derived from the Dutch province Zeeland. The current Maori name for New Zealand is Aotearoa, or Land of the Long White Cloud. The next Europeans to arrive were the British in 1769, led by Captain James Cook. He got on slightly better with the Maori, although there were some violent incidents. Following Cook's visit, whalers, sealers and traders from Europe and North America would arrive to trade metals, European food and other goods in return for timber, water and artefacts. Unfortunately, muskets were traded, and the introduction of European potatoes meant more sustained military campaigns became possible. This meant that intertribal warfare escalated to a scale that hadn't been possible before. Between 1807 and 1837, at least 3,000 battles became part of what became known as the Musket Wars, of which between 20,000 to 40,000 deaths, mass enslavement and newly drawn territorial boundaries being the only things to show for it. By the 1500s they'd invented pas, or fortified hill forts. However, their design was found to be inadequate when dealing with opponents with muskets. During the Musket Wars, these were adapted for modern warfare. Little did they know they would become a necessity long afterwards. In 1840, an important document was drawn up and signed, the Waitangi Agreement. This was in response to the havoc raged during the Musket Wars, plus the increasing arrivals of unruly settlers from the Old World, and the need to develop a commercial relationship were pressing matters to address on both sides. The Maori were concerned with the bad behaviour of some of the settlers and the need to protect their own land ownership interests. The agreement was translated into the Maori language, but herein some problems lay. The translation was not 100% accurate. The Maori, for example, did not have a word for governance, and disagreements in the later decades would arise over who had priority. I have heard that these mistranslations may have been honest mistakes. They were supposed to have been written during bumpy sea voyages at night, but the other alternative, which is hardly surprising, is that these may have been done on purpose. Before this was appreciated, however, some Maoris were keen to sign the agreement. It would mean that New Zealand would become a colony of the UK and would grant the Maori the rights of British subjects. Others were more suspicious, fearing that a loss of tenure would follow, with some likening it to the beginning of the end for their people, citing the loss of the moa as a metaphor. Tua Nagaro te moa, lost as the moa was lost. The agreement was signed, and in theory that should have solved whatever problems the Maori had with the numerous settlers. Unfortunately, in practice, it was quite different. Maori started to lose their land, sometimes through legitimate sales, though quite often they were unfair deals or may have even been seized. This led to the New Zealand Wars from 1845 to 1872 that broke out between the Maori, the colonial and British forces. Both sides saw one another's behaviour as a violation of the agreement. The British saw their rebellion as a contravention of its rights of administration under the Crown. The Maori, on the other hand, and I believe this to be the stronger argument, believed that the British were not respecting the rights of land ownership they said they would. After its terrible conclusion, the Maori sought to rectify violations of the agreement by the British, a process that continues to this day, thanks to their incredible resilience. Speaking of resilience, Tui, or Tani as he was really called, had his resilience tested by the fact that not only did he live in a difficult time quite different from today, but also the fact that he was autistic. The Maori even have a word for autism, takiwatanga, which means in his or her own time and space. That is precisely what Tui did, and he did it at a time long before autism was recognised anywhere in the world. It is still something that the world has yet to recognise the full value of, in my opinion, especially when it comes to competing with non-autistics for the best opportunities that life can offer. Whilst a lot has changed, significant struggles remain. Indeed, writing this story and growing as an individual in a world not made for you, sometimes all alone, is testament to what this story is about. Like Tui, I had to learn that fear isn't a reason not to do things, and that your limitations are more negotiable than you might realise. In my case, it was driving a minibus, or driving through the chaos of Inverness. For all autistics, hold the line and keep pushing. And there we have it, the epic conclusion of Pouakai. I hope you all enjoyed this story. It was good fun to research, and I feel it's especially unique. A mini masterpiece. I have other ideas for stories that are still in development, but if you're wanting more, you can buy my novel World Warrior on Amazon, but make sure you type in Endemic to Earth World Warrior so it knows which one. Until next time guys, have a good one.